invite Meir Lakein, our Director of Organizing, to stand.
All right, so, hey everybody. Rebecca told us that the theme for tonight is Siyyum. So let's start off by talking about how not to do Siyyum. Here's how the pendulum swung for me when I was a new organizer close to 25 years ago. When I was a young person with a whole lot of passion and nothing remotely resembling joy to guide me. First, I would take too much control. I would dominate the strategy, I would script my leaders, I would try to control things as if that would guarantee me success. Then it would occur to me that that's not actually organized, that's stage management. And I'd back off completely, walk away, let the leaders figure it out themselves, never assert myself. And then when things start to fail, I'd step back and control things again. Guess which strategy worked better? Neither. I made a big mess. At first glance, what I did sounds like Siyyum. I withdrew. But the first glance, the first glance is often facile and counterproductive. Our tradition is teaching us something far more complicated than that when it teaches us about Siyyum. I've since learned what real Siyyum is in organizing, and in part I've learned that through my organizing experience, and in part I've learned that through my own tradition. Why is the Joint Fellowship a Jewish organizing fellowship rather than an organizing fellowship for people who happen to be Jewish? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but in my opinion, one is because public life, political life, is incredibly complicated. Living and negotiating with other people who are as flawed and broken as we are, it's complex. And our tradition can guide us in how to do that. Not that Jewish tradition is the best. Not that Jewish tradition is the only guide, but for those of us who are Jewish, it's our tradition. And if we mine it with an open heart and mind, we can draw on the wisdom of millennia as we wade through what sometimes feels like a swamp. Would make sense what I'm saying? You with me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. The fellows will lecture us about Siyyum, and I won't even lecture you for so much longer, I promise. But the fellows will portray it through stories. And the Torah is Jews' first model of teaching through stories. Why? We're taught we as people are not God, but we can emulate God. How? We listen closely to the stories and emulate what God does. The Talmud, the key literature of Jewish law, teaches that just as we learn from stories how that God feeds the hungry, like God did from the Jews in the desert after they left Egypt, when they were hungry and manna fell from the heavens, just as God did that, we need to be hungry. Just as the Torah teaches us through story that God clothes the naked, as God did when Adam and Eve needed clothes, so we need to do that. We learned that God won't tolerate unjust, oppressive systems. God looked at Sodom and Gomorrah, which the rabbis taught us banned helping visitors or people in need. And on top of that, had the audacity to claim that by neglecting people in need, they were actually helping them. What did God do when God saw that system? God burned it to the ground. God looked at slavery in Egypt and said it wouldn't stand. When we organize, we emulate that stance. That's what we do. We also engage in Siyyum by emulating the stories in the Torah of how God engages in Siyyum. With Siyyum, God doesn't control everything. God chooses to step back, make room for creation, not to impose God's will over everything so that people can have free will, but God doesn't disappear. God makes it clear what God expects from people and what God believes people are capable of. And God guides people through story and scripture. And we try to emulate that as organizers. One of the ways we prepare fellows to do that by teaching them about self-interest and its role in organizing. It's not about being selfish and only serving your own ends, but it's also not about being completely selfless, completely negating one's own values and needs. Self-interest is the meeting point between self and other. That's why we use the term interest. It comes from the Latin inter esse, to be among. As organizers, we bring people together, and together they each bring their own interests to the table and create new common interests that exist when they come together among each other. And we teach our fellows the framework for that work. When an organizer engages in Siyyum, it doesn't mean that they negate themselves. It doesn't mean that they walk away and leave their leaders to figure it out. It means they open up room for their leaders in the community. It's that new open space created by people who aren't interested in taking up all the oxygen in the room. That space to be among, that relationships grow, that creativity thrives, that strategy is born, that victories are won. Moses is described in the Torah both as the greatest leader the Jews ever had and as the most humble person ever. That filled 12 with Saul Alinsky's instruction that a successful organizer must combine ego and humility. A few weeks ago in the weekly portion, we learned about how Moses practices Siyyum as a leader and organizer. On God's instruction, because Moses had enough doing it by himself, Moses assembled 70 people, and consecrated them to lead with him. But then two people, Eldad and Medad, who weren't consecrated, begin to prophesize on their own. Joshua, Moses' most loyal follower, says, "My Lord, you've got to stop them. They don't have permission to lead. What are they doing? It's going to be a mess." Moses says, "You're worried about my honor? If only all of God's people could be prophets." Moses is still going to lead, but rather than being threatened by new leaders, he's thrilled. He understands that for others to have power doesn't have to mean that he can have less. It can mean that we can all have more. Yeah? So look, it's no surprise that this fellowship class has chosen the theme of Siyyum. I've had a lot of young organizers, and I've been with many fellowship classes. First of all, this is the first fellowship class guided by the astoundingly talented Lisa Levine. Second of all, I'm so impressed by how well this particular class pulls onto that mix of ego and humility. They're ready to organize. They're ready to take a stand and take risks. They've done great work. You're going to hear about tonight. They're making things happen. They're making a difference. But they haven't approached it with grand claims. They haven't come thinking that they know everything, wondering why everyone else doesn't know as much as they do. They haven't come to lecture people. They've come with a maturity, a mix of ego and humility. And I think that's part of why they've learned so much and been so successful this year. They impress me, and as someone who's been doing this for a while at this point, I don't impress easily. They're an amazing group with so much to be proud of. I'm looking forward to hearing their stories about how they've understood and acted on Siyyum. We should all listen closely. They have a great deal to teach all of us. Thanks.